Nothing is off the table when it comes to defending our country, said Liberal leader Mark Carney. He was talking about a potential federal export embargo against Western Canadian oil, gas, uranium, and potash. Carney says that Canada faces such a grave threat from President Trump's tariffs and annexation talk that nothing can be taken off the table, especially using BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan's primary resource industries as strategic striking points. And he's seen the light on Canada's precarious energy infrastructure, which has no West-East pipeline, thanks to that project's throttling by the federal Liberal government that he now leads, in combination with François Legault's CAQ government in Quebec. When running for the Liberal Party leadership, Carney sounded pragmatic, stating that Canada needed West-East pipelines, including through Refusnik, Quebec. After meeting with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, Carney sounded more conciliatory in his tone to Westerners' long-standing demands to be allowed to build pipelines eastward, including repealing the so-called No More Pipelines Act. All that lasted a hot minute until Carney reversed himself on April Fool's Day, stating that the anti-pipeline and energy development legislation passed by his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, would remain in place. As former President George W. Bush said,
"Fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again."
Carney might be the Prime Minister of all Canadians, but he is still a Liberal. And the Liberals are a party for only the right kind of Canadian. The kind of Canadian who works for the government. The kind of Canadian that is sufficiently progressivist in their views on the latest social dogmas. The kind of Canadians who value abstract fervor to fight global warming over more pedestrian concerns like earning a living. The kind of Canadians who vote to continue Liberal rule after the disastrous previous 9 years. Conservative voting, gun-toting, oil drilling, woke-resisting Westerners don't fit the bill of Carney's right kind of Canadian. In Liberal conceptions of post-national Canadian nationalism, they aren't really true Canadians. They're more like Americans living on Canadian soil. And so repealing anti-energy legislation like Bill C-69, commonly known as the No More Pipelines Act, does not advance Carney's hereto successful objective of collapsing the NDP vote behind the Liberals. Consolidating the hard left behind him is going to mean some sacrifices. Sacrifices like the West's biggest industries. The oil and gas industries are on the table as pawns to be sacrificed, but they are most certainly not on the table as industries to be championed, as means of economic and energy independence. The industries that will be protected at all costs are located somewhat eastward of the Palliser Triangle. They include Ontario's heavily subsidized electric vehicle plants, making products that nobody wants. They include Quebec's très-subsidized aerospace industry that Trump is trying to lure southward. They include the Soviet-style supply-managed dairy and egg sectors that both Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre say will never be given up for negotiation, even though it is one area that Canada is most clearly a protectionist villain in free trade, and unjustly costs Canadian families hundreds of dollars a year in inflated costs. In fact, Mark, nothing is off the table, Carney says, and I quote, "It's off the table." All parties have promised mandatory French language labeling requirements are off the table, despite being another major and legitimate trade irritant for the Americans. To continue on this theme, Carney said that the digital services tax, which is levied against American companies and passed on to Canadian consumers, is, you guessed it, off the table. So yeah, it turns out that not quite everything is on the table. Just the possibility of economic warfare against BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan from our own federal government.